Welcome to Heart Change You Live. We're doing a special edition. We do Tuesdays at 12:30 Central on a weekly basis. But with the recent shootings, I've really been gripped, and so many people I know have just been gripped with a kind of a malaise, a pain, a trauma. It's just been heavy, and I've been trying to minister to different people. And the whole idea of being equipped, being built up to where we're able to touch the lives of around us. It's a difficult time. It's a difficult season. And I want to start with something that I was thinking about. This actually goes all the way back to driver's ed from like 50 years ago. I mean, that's been a few years for me. When I was studying in class, and the statement that they gave was that the compliance in the traffic laws is actually voluntary. And what you're hearing today, you're hearing all kinds of things of, okay, get cops in the schools and take away the guns, and you're hearing a lot of these kinds of things. But as I was thinking back to that compliance and compliance being voluntary, that ends up being really important. And I want you to think about something. How many of you have driven in the city lately? I have, and you have a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, and what's going on at that particular point in time? I mean, everybody's zooming past you. If you're doing 50, you actually end up being a problem. And so you get all of that different mix. And so a lot of times these solutions that we're proposing, if there's not voluntary compliance, guess what's going to happen? There's not voluntary compliance, everything begins to fall apart. And so that's my starting point. The answer actually comes back to the individual. Need to get back. Welcome, Heather. You've been on. It's good to have you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And James, you're a newbie today.
So. I am a newbie. That's right.
How are you going to handle it?
Hopefully with grace and humility.
Well, I hope so too.
Yeah.
So why don't you guys just to start, give me a little bit of feedback on that. Everybody's rushing to solutions right now. It's like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. The opening that I brought really sets the tone that the solution isn't probably in those kinds of things. Yeah, we need to do those. We may need to do them on a short term. But the real solution is actually going to focus on the nation as a whole, peoples as a whole. What's happening in our culture that we're seeing these kinds of things with such a regularity?
Yeah, I appreciate your kind of thinking back, because I've been thinking back to the Columbine shootings. I think that for me and my generation, that was the first sort of tragedy like this, where it was unthinkable that children themselves would lash out in this way, and I mean, that's been 30 years, 25 years. I don't even know. I don't know how old I am. I don't like to think about it very often, but yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about that undercurrent and how our approach to government, laws, rules has slidden down, and in my generation for sure, where there used to be, I mean, I'm a cop's kid. There used to be this more reverence, I think, for our politicians, for people in charge, but there seems to be an irreverence, and a lack of respect, and a lack of community mindedness, that what I do impacts the people around me. Excuse me. Yeah, so as you can tell, I've been very emotional about this today, and I know I'm not the only one.
Well, one of the other things I think that makes it difficult to come up with answers is that it doesn't, like, if I attack my bully, you understand that. Like, oh, this guy's been bullying you. This is without cause. These kids didn't do anything except show up to school. Mm-hmm. And so we have an act of violence perpetrated on innocents. in a way, and that becomes like, why? What's going on? And so it makes it more difficult to find answers.
Well, if you go to the Buffalo shooting, if you go to the Uvalde shooting, both of them were like that. They were just violence taken out on completely innocent people. And so all of a sudden, I don't feel safe. Now, I'm going to tagline from safe because I really believe that's the most significant issue all the way back. If you're asking, why is this sort of thing occurring, I'm going to take it back to kids and progressing through childhood. And one of the most powerful issues is safe. If you don't have safe in place, spiritual development is really kind of stillborn. It's shut down to where a child doesn't develop. And if a child doesn't develop, there's no such thing called conscience. We actually talked in the last program about children kind of come out of the womb a little bit selfish, and they're wanting, my toy and my this and my that. Well, if I have adults with arrested development, where they've not gone through that step-by-step process to where they've developed a conscience and they're seeing the impact they're having on other people, now I have a dangerous kid who is in an adult body, who is going to lash out and really isn't going to even notice. And then let's make it even worse. Video games, Call of Duty, which was very much involved in one of the killings. Call of Duty, to where, these aren't people. This is a video game. Life, reality is now being mixed in with, video is reality. It's not real until it's hit Snapchat. It's not real until it's hit social media. That's where you declare things. That's real life anymore. So you've got these video games. All of this is just being blurred at such a high level, and we're not talking about these kinds of things.
Right. And that is a real issue, is, because you become desensitized to violence and you become desensitized to consequence. And we have such a culture now where it's, I want immediate gain for my actions. And there's nothing more immediate than perpetrating violence on somebody. You feel that right away. And and some people, the desires of our heart are selfish. The Bible speaks of that. So we get into selfishness and a selfish zone. And like you said, if we haven't developed a conscience, and we haven't developed a way of understanding the world and interacting in the world that doesn't involve us, then you're going to have repeat incidents just like this.
Now, we have a video series. Love to have our listeners, love to have you check this out. It's on the site. It's on the YouTube site, the Live Free Men site, that talks about these basic steps that need to be in place first before that conscience actually gets developed. And there's one part of conscience that's just kind of there. It's what I call normal. In other words, your conscience is going to kind of blend in with your upbringing. And that kind of conscience is, however mom and dad did it, whichever way the toilet paper is, there's a normal. And so there's a kind of mechanical conscience. When we're talking about conscience today, I'm talking about where I see other people. When I genuinely see other people and I see the impact I'm having, that's the real development of conscience. When I start seeing that, well, you won't do that. And the first 3 layers that we talk about in the step-by-step series, number 1 is safe. If you don't feel safe, there's an anxiety thing that's going to grip you, and you literally won't have the capacity to see other people. So until there's a layer of safe laid down, I'm going to go nowhere in terms of developing a conscience.
So I'm just thinking off the cuff. How do you feel about this idea? I know I've heard you share and teach about that the spiritual development begins in utero. It actually begins, we know, with God's creation, his plan for us, forming us in the womb and covering us with a body. So he already has us intact. But I'm just thinking about my generation and how, like I was saying, it's gone in a slope. Well, my generation is the first generation after Roe v. Wade. It's the first generation where it was questioned whether a child is worth giving your life up for.
Is even a human being.
Right. And so, that concept of being safe, growing up in a world where a baby is a personal decision, or a lump of cells, or just a biological process or whatever, as a child reconciling that, I'm even thinking about in utero, if the mother had considered that before, had even struggled within herself over a decision, a choice to keep or to lose a child, how much impact can that have on us spiritually, as a generation? And
it's huge. On top of safe, the next one is actually belonging, and I tie belonging probably more into the category of worth than I do any other thing. So you're talking about cells. I've got cells inside of me. It's a fetus. It's a choice. When I'm living there, what am I doing to the worth of my child? And what is this doing to the worth of people in general? One of the biggest factors, if I don't feel like I'm a human being, if I have no worth whatsoever, then again, there's an insecurity there. Anxiety is going to be a theme here. Anxiety starts with safe and peace, but then anxiety is built by worth and, frankly, who God created us to be. Much of our worth is built off from our relationship with God. It's built off from our relationship with people. And you guys know me. You know this one-liner. You can't achieve worth. You have to receive worth.
Right.
And so that's done through relationships. So what you're talking about, when I make someone an animal, when I make someone subhuman, a choice, etc.,
or just a process of evolution, or a biological.
It's a science experiment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Now I'm impacting the worth of that person, and frankly, that's permeating all through our generation. That's and so it creates higher levels of insecurity. It creates higher levels of anxiety. And I'm going to tell you that insecurity, anxiety piece is going to be everywhere. It's going to be inside of everything that we're talking about. And when my anxiety, my worth struggle, when that is down, my ability to see other people goes down because I'm just totally self-focused at that point. And if I'm totally self-focused, until I can genuinely see other people and I can see the impact I'm having on other people, there is no conscience in the good sense that absolutely needs to be developed. And so I can go get a gun and shoot whoever. And if that's what's happening across our nation, you can't employ enough police officers. You can't employ enough people. You can't have enough metal detectors because, back to where I started, compliance ends up being voluntary. If we're not creating the basic level of healthy human being that needs to happen, this society is going to turn into chaos.
Right.
Well, and I think that's where that ends up being the answer. There are already programs in place that aren't being utilized, like the Big Brother program, which I took part in when I was younger and helped to hopefully mold some young kids into...
Oh, you're not talking about like Orwellian Big Brother, like
No,
1984.
no. Big Brother program.
Big Brothers, Big Sisters.
Where you come in and be a mentor to kids that don't need it. And, like the latchkey programs where you actually have somebody sit down and just pay attention. You don't have to sit there and read the Bible to them. I mean, that would be nice, but just pay attention and be a mentor, somebody that they can turn to when they're crying out for help. Because a lot of this, I feel like, is I'm crying out for help and nobody's listening to me. Nobody can hear me. So how do I make a bigger noise?
Right. And kids are having to, I feel like, especially as they're reaching adolescence right now, we're kind of being pulled between this idea that my body and my being here is just a fluke of an evolutionary process and a choice that was made by my parents and a biological chemical reaction. But then also being pulled in this other worldview where we want to value people's individual expression, their identity, who they think they are. So the two are diametrically opposed, really.
Right.
Where does the kid get the idea that, okay, so you were an accident, but you're here now, so now you get to have an identity? I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to logically line up in the brain. It's a pulling, it's a fence line, I feel like.
I mean, that's where if you go back to just basic biblical language, Psalm 139, and you simply believe, oh, wow, I'm created. And not just I'm created, but I'm created for a purpose.
Yes.
And God has a purpose in my life. I know in recovery, I run into this all the time. Well, I'm so glad I went through what I did because it's made me a better person, and now that I'm a better person, etc. It's like they're trying to take all of that pain and create some kind of a purpose there that wasn't there. And I'm not opposed to that. In fact, if you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Scripture is pretty clear there that once I've been through that pain and I've received the grace of God, I've received the comfort of God, I'm better equipped to minister to others who are in that point of pain than I am. So I freely acknowledge, yes, there's a scriptural point, but it's almost like, wow, I'm searching for a purpose, so I've got to create a purpose for all the stupidity that I did. And at some level, I'm kind of looking at him going, no, you did stupidity. Does God have a plan B? Yes. Is God a redeemer? Yes. Can he take it and turn it to good? Yes. So can you breathe and relax? Yes. But don't go back and say that God wanted you to walk through all this stupidity just so that you could have this purpose now.
Well, no, I mean, he called me 25 years ago. You think he wanted me to get my act together 25 years ago? Absolutely, And so, yeah, that's just a cop-out in a way to say, oh, well, now this is what I've learned in order to be creative for this purpose. The truth is our purpose is to worship God and praise God and to allow him to guide our steps and love one another. That's our purpose. That's, if you're looking for answers in life, is love your neighbor as yourself. That's the top thing. And I felt purposeless for a long time.
Yeah.
Very long time.
Yeah.
And that led to, well, there's, nihilism, basically. There's no point in any of this.
Nihilism, cynicism.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of isms.
Criticism.
Yeah. There are a
Yeah.
lot of that came out of you. And so there's this truckload of negativity. And it wasn't information that changed you. It was relationship.
Right.
It was
Absolutely.
love. And if you go back to the first two steps, you've got the peace, you've got that sense of safety, you've got the belonging. The third one, I call it covering, but people who aren't in more of a religious mentality aren't going to understand that as much. So it's nurturing. The third step is the development of trust. Those three steps, if you go back and you look at that, now I'm creating a level of health there in the child that is able then, a couple steps later, the next one is actually creativity, confidence. The next one after that is focus, then the following one. So you're clear down to step 6 before conscience is really beginning to develop.
Realized.
Once I'm able to focus, once I'm able to stop being totally consumed by me, totally consumed by what I want and what I need, well, where are we today? We're a dopamine generation. Mm-hmm. We're a, I need my next fix. And frankly, the screen is a part of that. We have a young generation that's being raised on a screen, and so they know which colors and flashes, and so little children in their brains, they're setting off these reactions, and they're basically setting them up almost in a form of addiction. I find it kind of interesting that even China is stepping back going, we can't have our kids on screens this much. This isn't good for them.
Right.
I mean, it just, and if you look at almost universally, you go out to California where you've got the mecca of all of the Google
Valley,
and all of that. All of those people, they're putting limitations on their own kids. No, there's no way, because they know the impact. They know the power of this thing. We're creating an addiction to this kind of stimuli sort of a thing. And at that point, again, no internal worth, no sense of anything in here. So then
there's a vacuum that
absolute
nothing
vacuum.
can possibly fill. You know, it's a lost cause. I mean, I believe that's why addiction is so prevalent now, and it's in every culture. You know, when I was growing up, you didn't hear the people who did heroin; those were movie stars. You didn't hear about heroin in a tiny little town. You know, you didn't hear about just the things that the dysfunction that we see in small town America now, you know, and because we're feeding into a vacuum that has no bottom.
Well, and that's
There's
part of the
no
problem.
foundation.
It's
at all.
insidious, you know. It's like, yeah, you didn't hear about heroin or cocaine, but there was weed, you know, and alcohol, and it's just little by little, and it trickles in. It's just like the screens, you know. It's a cell phone. That's all it is. Oh, well, let's add a calculator, and then let's add videos, and now let's add. I can make a friend and take care of it on my phone, like so I don't have to do relationship anymore. I got my phone as my relationship. I mean, something like 85% of pornography consumed comes through that phone.
Well,
that
and
mobile device.
it's become a babysitter.
And
you
it's-
know? It
yeah,
started out in
absolutely.
our generation with
Right.
latchkey kids coming home. I mean, I would
Yeah,
come home.
plug in the
Both my
Atari.
parents had to work. Right. You know, the Atari, the NES, but even before that, it was, I mean, watching MTV
Sure.
when I got home from school. And there's
Yep.
this whole other world and these people who are living without rules. And like, I remember seeing Madonna on TV and going, where did this human come from? I've never seen anyone like this before. And, you know, my mom had an answer for where she came from. but you know, I think it started then with that becoming a babysitter and becoming a center of the home.
Let's flip to answers if we can.
Yeah.
And I want to give you what I think is maybe one of the most significant answers that's pretty simple. It's called the family meal. I mean, we've almost totally destroyed family
Right.
and working moms and everything else under the sun, so this one's hard to handle. And when you do see family meals, I see it at restaurants anymore, two people sitting down to have a meal together and they don't even know the other person's there. They both got their phones and they're into their phones, and so it's just a functionary meal. But start with something as simple as a family meal, no phones at the table. We sit down, we look at one another, we actually learn to talk to one another. The power of that, the power of connecting, I believe the power of connecting is the single most powerful thing that can turn this whole thing around. And we're headed away from that. We're headed to where two people sitting in the same room will text one another. It's like, are you kidding me?
But what do you do when people don't have that desire to even do that? Because that's a very good step to do, but people don't have the desire. That's why they're out together in public sitting on their phone. So what do you actually do?
Well, let's start even more basic than that. They don't have the skill. I mean, I know people who to sit down with another person is like overwhelming and intimidating. So the first part of the reason they don't have the desire is that they don't have the skill. I mean, it's kind of like, oh, we're going to sit here.
How do we do this? Yeah.
What would we talk about? And
What you just looked at on your phone.
Yeah, well, wait.
You know,
Let me just tell you what I saw on my phone. Well, the most important topic that you can ever talk about is like me or like you, where I say, well, how are you doing? Well, tell me about yourself, you know, and then, of course, you get the blank stares and, you know, who are you? What do you like to do, etc. But that's just learning to ask questions. One of the things in our curriculum, I have one of the articles is about questions and learning to ask questions and just throwing out some of the different things. And when you learn to ask basic questions of one another, you know, it's there. Now, back to what Matthew brought, what if there's no desire? What if there's no one who even wants to go there? Well, the first thing you got to see is outcomes. And if you're hearing what I'm saying, do you realize how broken our world is becoming? and how much anxiety is present and how much struggle with worth. And the only solution that I know to this, the only biblical lasting solution is connection.
Yeah, I'm thinking about as an addict and that the dopamine addiction, and asking someone who is so used to being, which is all of us now, it's all of us, especially in our country, so used to being ramped up at all times. And then you're going to ask me to sit still. Mm-hmm. Like, I've worked in treatment centers. We sit here with people who are just off the street, but you can see this in families. You can see this in a restaurant. You can see, we can't sit still long enough to even look at each other, to even have a conversation. It's boring. We don't even realize that, it's happening at such a subconscious level, but it's like, you could call it skill, but I think there's something even more insidious behind it, which is this, where's the stimulus,
Right.
where's,
Right.
Yeah,
I need more lights. I need more action. I need more, yeah.
We feel literally dead inside without it.
Back to the art of communication, which it seems like schools have given up on. Actually sitting down and having conversations and learning to communicate your ideas well and become articulate. I mean, that's one of the things Jordan Peterson talks about, is to become powerful, you need to become articulate. You need to learn words, what their powers are and what they convey, and how to open up dialogue and learn to speak to people that aren't necessarily willing. Find out what they care about and make it happen.
When you say that, I immediately jump back to me, one of the core themes of this program: message sent, message received. And articulate is partially about choosing the right words and crafting the words, etc. But one of the most powerful ways to be articulate without being articulate is actually loving. And
right.
Once you've received love, once you've drank that in, and you actually have a genuine caring towards other people, when you have a genuine caring, people notice that. Right. And they receive a different message. And so even that, on the one hand, yes, I work at language. I'm continually trying to figure out how to say it, but message is powerful, which means spirit is powerful.
In essence, becoming articulate in what you don't say too, it becomes an art and becomes something that's needed. And
I was talking to my adult son yesterday and saying, I can't believe I'm at the place where I have to ask you to define terms for me because I'm so out of touch with. I can't believe I'm at this age, but it happens to all of us. So, I'm just thinking about my kids, highly intelligent, really highly intelligent young men, big hearts. And the truth is, as much as we can blame technology, it has also been a place of connection for them. Mm-hmm. They came from a divorced family where mom had to work, dad had to work. We had a lot of problems. They were raised by their grandparents who were pouring in as much as they possibly could, but just not enough. And so the internet has given them a place to connect with other people who have similar interests. They've learned lots of things. So I don't want to make it out to be this big, bad, or horrible devil, because the truth is it has had a lot for my children. I watch, it's had a lot of benefit for them in learning
tool that
connection.
Has a lot of uses.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they connect with others that way.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, at that point, you're receiving from a machine. You're receiving from content. Go back to Jordan Peterson, and you're crafting content. You're crafting content in order to be powerful. That's a whole different piece than
Right.
when I get back into a worth zone, where I care about you and I'm interacting, and you've got two human beings. And when you put the machine between that, you eliminate some of the worth piece that's going on.
100%. 100%. I agree. I just see that there's like I said, there's a vacuum in the home. There's a vacuum in the schools. You and I both share that we come from well, you come from a farm background, but you've worked in schools, and my family is all teachers and principals and guidance counselors, and these teachers are also trying to pour into 35 kids, in a 45-minute block where they have to meet these certain things, and so they're working from a deficit as well. So I'm just thinking about, these seem like such huge insurmountable things, as I'm thinking about the mom who is exhausted when she comes home, and the best thing that she can think to do for her kids is to make a box of macaroni and cheese because that's what she can afford, and put her kids in front of the TV and be like, I'm just going to sit here and melt into this TV, and at least I'm in the same room with them. These are real people with real issues.
And I think that's an important point, because there are a lot of really talented teachers out there that can engage the ones that can't be reached, that have that ability. And then when we find them, we bury them with more kids, and it becomes to the point where it's like, I can't even fight this fight anymore.
Yeah.
And
it was interesting when I was teaching school. I was in a track system, and the novice was put in. They gave me a couple of low-level kids, a couple classes of that, and they found out I was good at it. So then they did exactly that. They buried me with it. So it's kind of funny. But the most powerful thing is being able to communicate caring. And then the next thing, I'm going to go back, and you were talking about this before the show began. We've got to also be able to work through our own grief, because if we're caught up in our own grief, then we can't communicate that caring. And this is another place that I find that we're seriously lacking today. We are so good at projecting blame. We're so good at playing the victim. We're so good at let's get guns in school, i.e. with detectives, or let's get them out of school. I mean, we're playing all of the political battles and fighting back and forth. We're not good at handing off grief in a way that we drink in life so that we've got life to give.
I'm thinking too about remove the log from your eye before you reach over to take it out of your neighbor's eye, right? Because we are always looking, hey, what you got? You got something in your eye. Let me tell you about it, and really the only point of influence that I've truly got is in what I'm doing in my life, in my connections.
Right.
And so we can talk about these big systemic issues and even systemic solutions, but if the cogs that are in the system are rusty and broken and worn, and because we're working on generations and generations of pain. How do I
I'm going to break in. We've got a question or comment. So
yes, we have viewer Jane sent in a question via YouTube, and Jane wrote, caring, communications, and relationship are crucial to quality of life. Agreed. How do you reconcile that with the fact that every day we're moving closer to Jesus' return? Doesn't the Bible tell us that things will only get worse?
Birth pains.
It's funny, because when I talked to James, that was his first thing. Well, it's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And
in this world, we will have trouble.
But that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of praying for others and trying to find solutions. And that's what we kind of got away from. Was you asked, what are the answers here? And that is it, is bring God back into the schools. Everybody talks about it's a separation of church and state, but that was so the state didn't influence God, that God was still allowed to have his influence in multiple facets. But
you went exactly where I was going to go with that. Was how can any of this work if we're not allowed to bring God into the conversation?
Well, no, that's good. Now, part of the issue there is we've got to be life givers. And what's happening now is the fight against that life giver is so overwhelming, so powerful. I'll take it to me working with addicts. I was at one level working in the public school with kids. I was at another level working at Elyria. I was at another level pastoring. And then I took on addiction. It body slammed me for a couple of years. And I had to grow into that. I had to develop the strength. I had to develop the substance, the authority to be able to handle that pounding day by day by day. And that's really probably my biggest answer to that whole question. We've actually been able for years there, we're able to survive with a kind of a wimpy Christianity. There's no room for wimpy Christians anymore. As things get worse, and I'm looking at this, I'm looking at how chaotic our nation is right now. Think about the pain, the trauma. We got 3.5%, 4% unemployment.
Right.
What's going to happen if the economy falls apart and, we're at 10% unemployment, we're at 15% unemployment, the government benefits are running out. And so, I mean, you think we have trouble now, it could get much worse. And this is part of the problem. Let's go back to anxiety, insecurity, which is driving this whole thing. If things get worse, what's going to happen to the anxiety, insecurity?
Let me tell you, my kids, and my one in particular, he's terrified about what's happening in the economy. He's terrified about how am I going to provide. He's 27 now, and he's starting to think about, how am I going to provide for a family, Mom? How am I going to do the things that to my grandfather's generation, was it hard? Yes. It was coming back out of a depression, hard work, but they're really feeling way overwhelmed and way underprepared because they've been raised by a generation that was underprepared because they were raised by a generation. And what's happened is that the foundation that my grandfather had, church, family, those types of things, has slowly eroded into nothing but sand, and it's turning into quicksand.
And I believe that's part of why we see so much of the illnesses, psychiatric illnesses, et cetera, is because basically there's not the solidness on the inside to face the trauma that's coming from the outside. And part of that trauma is increased because of the videos, and we see all the murders from all over, et cetera. So the trauma level is increasing in many ways. But in many ways, it's also, you can look at our modern world and go, you think you had it hard now, you should have lived in World War II. The key to that ultimately gets back to, if we don't have people who understand their worth, understand their purpose, who are growing up, who are solid, who they are committed to sharing love and life with the people around them, and so they've got this purpose and they grow solid. And then when I get knocked off the horse, when I completely get beat up, and we've had school shootings, and I'm walking around and I'm just kind of in a daze, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this and I don't know what to do. We have to be able to pray that thing through. We've got to be able to get to the point to where we have life to give the people around us. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things, again, back to the program, that I've learned. It's like, I mean, the program's going to go through ups and downs. It's going to hit hard times. And sometimes the most significant thing I do is walk in that room and just not be totally blown away.
Right.
I mean, I may not have answers. I may not know what to say. I may not know what to do, but if they're looking at me going, oh, wow, he's completely blown out of the water, we're in trouble. If I'm able to walk in and go, I don't have a clue, I don't have an answer, but I know the one who has the answers.
Right.
That message going out is
humility. That humility. Mm-hmm. That's what's so attractive. You know, as someone who was an atheist, went through an agnostic period, went through a seeking and all sorts of esoteric. I was seeking this. I think there are a lot of people who are seeking this. They're seeking community. They're seeking they're going to yoga. They're reading self-help books. They're going to rallies. They're trying to better themselves, you know. And here's my perception for so long is that same perception that people have of Christians today. It's been politicized. They're angry, they're bigots. They don't see the love. They don't see the humility. They don't see So as I was praying this morning, what God gave me, I'm like, God, you please help me understand how I can come alongside in a way that not only helps the people who are grieving these losses that I haven't experienced, that I don't know what to do. You know, there were two scriptures he gave me. The first one was James 3:16 and 17. So he talks about, James 3:16 talks about the problem. Where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. There's the problem. Envy and self-seeking.
And let me just break in for a minute and you can continue.
Yeah.
You're virtually guaranteed to walk in envy and self-seeking until you start seeing other people, until you start seeing the impact you're having on other people. Think about a 3-year-old, mine. Life is all about that child, and they're living in their inside of their 30 seconds, and that's just what's going to happen until this conscience piece is developed. And the conscience piece I'm talking about here is not necessarily even right and wrong. It's, oh, I see people. I see that we all share outcomes. I see the impact I'm having on other people. Whoa, I just crossed over a line to become a different person.
Right. I've got to work, like we were talking about, in the system. I'm one little cog. I'm one little grain of sand on the ocean. But this is the one I've got.
Amen.
This is the one I've got to work with. So I loved the solution right after this is James 3:17. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield.
Don't you love that phrase?
Willing to yield. That's a strong position. You were talking about a wimpy Jesus. Well, this wimpy Jesus is the one who yielded. He's the one who yielded to his Father's will. He's the one who said, not my will, but thine be done, Lord. He's the one who yielded as they spat on him, hit him. He's the one who yielded,
Actually,
full of mercy.
Let me break in. I bet both of you have experienced the shock in the program when somebody's getting ready to do something totally foolish, and we know it's foolish.
Yeah.
And I know that if we force them, they'll just be angry and bitter and etc. And so I say, I think you're being dumb, but we'll try it your way and see how it works. Willing to yield. You've both seen that. I think you've probably
absolutely.
both been
Right.
there where
I've
you're
been-
like,
experienced it.
you've looked at me and said, what kind of a fool are you to do that? But it's one of the most powerful communications in heart change. I'm willing to walk this through with you. What does that do for the person's worth? What does that do for trust? What does that do? I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool that most people are just like completely unaware of.
Well, and that's the struggle. I mean, that's, true biblical Christianity. You sacrifice a lot.
Yeah.
You have to sacrifice everything that you've ever known. And we're so prideful and we're so selfish that I don't want to give that up. I love that part of myself. But it's not biblical.
And that's what people are thinking about Christians. That is the viewpoint. I thought that about Christians. They're hypocrites.
Right.
That's what they are. They're hypocrites. They're judgmental. They're nothing like Jesus. I can't remember who it was, but there's some, maybe the Dalai Lama. Somebody said, "Your Jesus I like, but your Christians not so much."
Not
right?
so much, yeah.
That's when a new person is seeking answers and they come to a church. We're already battling that perception, and if what they see lines up with, they're going to be looking for it. So any hint of hypocrisy, any hint of I'm right, you're wrong, any hint of that is going to send them bolting.
Which means, go ahead and finish the verse, because that picks up on that.
Full of mercy, and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. We are to be the united body of Christ on earth. The united body, but instead it's so divisive. And I know that's the world we live in, but it's so divisive,
And when it's information first, it's going to be divisive. It just, you can't help that. It's, if you're looking at every little nuance and just a minute, let me cross this T, let me dot this I, and you're fighting over that. That knowledge first, I think, ends up exaggerating the divisions, and so then you and I can't get along. If instead I'm willing to yield, full of mercy, full of good fruits, and you know that I care, we can agree to disagree. And we'll come back again tomorrow, and we'll discuss it again tomorrow. And it's okay, because you're showing love to me. You're showing worth. And you know what? Maybe before this is all said and done, I'm going to understand something I didn't understand before. I care about you enough. I treat you. I mean, that's the way we treat one another. Did you have another verse that you wanted to pick up?
Well, I did. When I was asking God, where do I go with this for other people? He took me to Revelation, where it says that they will overcome him, the devil. They overcame him with their testimony and the blood of the Lamb. So God was just really calling me to step into my own testimony, because, the word also says that, and I can't quote it chapter and verse, you probably can, that it is the goodness of God that leads to repentance, right? So my testimony is about the goodness of God.
That's
we know that absolutely repentance is key, and we've got to put that back in church. And but what leads to repentance is my testimony of the goodness of God, of his mercy, of his grace. I get, and go ahead and soundbite me or shoot me down or say whatever you need to say. I get where those shooters are coming from. I have been in that level of desperation, of darkness. I've never wanted to take a gun into a school and blow people away, but the feeling of despair, of loneliness, of feeling like I don't have a purpose in the world is...
Well, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I would agree with that. I was angry. I was really angry as a kid. I got left by two mothers. My dad was never there. And there are times, I remember one time these bullies were picking on me from the street, and I grabbed the rifle. There was no bullets in it, but I pointed it at them, and they just started laughing at me even harder. So now we're into this. Well, next time I'm going to load it. Luckily I did have, even though he wasn't there, a father trying to do his best, and some love there, and love from my brothers to sustain me through that. But there was still a lot of anger, and I do get that. I just think my anger would have been more directed and more pointed. I don't like the tragedy happening without, that's just so random, it's seemingly. But I do understand that. I do understand that. What is that? Rage against the dying of the light and all that. We've been talking about this for centuries. Poets and people, and there's a lot of anger there because, and I think, with a newfound understanding, a lot of that comes from we're created with a purpose. And when we don't have our purpose, and there's nobody godly there to lay it out for us and to walk us into our purpose, then you start raging because you're like, I know I'm better than this. I know there's something more, but I don't know how to achieve it. And
I go back to a phrase I use a lot: all things work by spiritual authority. So when the spiritual authority factors, the moms, the dad, the love or lack of love, etc., when that emptiness is there, it produces a result.
Right.
And this is what we're trying to do as a culture. We're trying to produce good results out of emptiness, out of brokenness, in a place where there is no connection, there isn't the kind of love and caring, and we're cutting off God, we're cutting off any language about God, we're cutting off the relationships with God, and yet we're expecting to have good fruit.
Self-help books.
Just insanity. And the basis of our program, so often we bring it back to, okay, I've got to get you connected with God because I can't do what's needed here. But then once they get you connected with God and you're working there, then the next step is I've got to be able to have enough strength, substance, stamina inside of me to stay in Christ when you're yelling at me, or stay in Christ when you're failing, or whatever, where I can continue to love you. That kind of love is unbelievably powerful. And if we don't exalt that, we're in trouble. And then you go back to what you were talking about with the church. The church is more and more becoming political in so many circles. And frankly, on both sides of the aisle, they're screaming on both sides of the aisle of, go this way, go this way. And so we're getting more and more of those solutions, and less men and women of God who have the substance, the solidness to literally stand and keep standing.
The salt and the light.
Well, actually, I was going a different direction. You said to be salt and light. They've got to be able to stand in the midst of assault. Because what happens? The church is getting beat up from every direction. So until the men and women of God have the stamina and the strength to stand during those times and to love during those times, then what hope does this helpless kid who's on dopamine, so to speak, from video games and everything else, what hope does he have? And the answer is probably almost no hope at all.
Well, and I think that's, God has walked me through this several times. It's, Isaiah, who will stand in the gap? Oh, send me. Well, you get in the gap, and it hurts, man. There's a lot of beating in the gap.
Absolutely.
And so then you become afraid of the gap, but you have to go back into the gap, back into the breach, and you have to be willing to stand there and take the abuse and take the pounding in order to get through to people. And I don't think that we're willing to do that anymore.
Yeah, I was just seeing Stephen in my mind. Stephen boldly
Big Steve?
proclaimed the gospel in Acts.
Oh, Stephen. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
He boldly proclaimed the gospel, and it was in his dying, yielding, that Paul saw, hey, there's something different about these Christians. It wasn't him standing and fighting and I'm right and I'm enough. It was in his yielding and his love. He proclaimed the truth with love, and he yielded.
Well,
And
Jesus yielding in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Man.
They all hit the ground, and he's like, all right, where are we going?
Because there's a million voices yelling and screaming and fighting.
Yeah.
I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
But when they see someone proclaim the truth and stand
In love.
yielded
In love.
in
Yielded.
love.
In love, yeah.
Whew.
Then the Romans, when they took the Christians to the arena to be slaughtered, they would sing.
Yeah.
They would sing praises.
Well, I want to wrap it up. I think we've run our course in terms of length of time at least. But I do really come back to this point. We desperately need men and women of God. And one of the things that I do with addiction, a lot of times I look at people and say, you're looking for a quick and easy solution. There is no quick and easy solution.
No.
And certainly better security might help in the short term, because all we're talking about here is long-term stuff. And so, okay, argue about your short-term things. But in terms of long-term, we're talking real change that is needed across the nation at a full societal level. And if we don't pay attention to that, if we don't speak to that as churches, if we don't speak to that as men and women of God, then there's nothing. And the solutions that are being offered are hollow. And I didn't really get to what you were talking about, but man, I'd love to walk through grief. We actually have a series on that. We've got the Let It Go series and the King Seat and the Good Grief series. So we've got video series that we would encourage you to get a hold of and walk through them and look through them, because, I mean, there's powerful teaching that we've put together in this. I hope that you've been blessed by this time. If you have, pass it on. Let someone else know about this program and what's happening. We'll be back again on Tuesday at 12:30. So pass it on, join us, subscribe, like it. We want to get that message out there. We want the life of Christ, a solid example to go forth. Thank you for helping us do that.